Hello and welcome to the Women Empowerment Podcast. I am your host, Courtney Gideon, and it is my absolute pleasure today to introduce a boxing trainer, keynote speaker, and winner of the 2023 Mentorship Award, Yvette Raposo. Yvette, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So let's jump in because we've got lots to cover and not a lot of time. I always love to start from the beginning. I'm always fascinated to understand your story and how it came to be. So can you let us all in a little bit about where you grew up and what childhood was like for you?
Sure. I grew up in Toronto, East End Toronto, an area that is now called Leslieville. And when I was 9, my parents moved us out to Mississauga. So childhood for me was great. I had a good childhood. I was very much a loner of a kid. I was very much an introvert, which I still have parts of me which are very much an introvert. And that's something that you grow into and you learn about yourself and you learn how to manage that and maximize on those qualities about yourself. Mm-hmm. But as a child, I knew that I kind of liked to isolate myself, but I was content with it. So I would do things like ride my bike by myself around the city streets, hang out at the park, watch the people play basketball. And that's kind of my childhood was content and just kind of a time of exploration.
Do you have like brothers and sisters or?
I have one older sister, and the joke is, like I said in my speech at the Women Empowerment Awards, my older sister by 3 years, Catherine, she was my original sparring partner. So.
Okay. So, I mean, it sounds like childhood was great and you got outside a lot. That's kind of what I got from it, riding your bike, going to the park, watching basketball. Was that a big part of your childhood? Was outdoors?
It was. And, my parents were immigrants to this country from Portugal. So they were both so busy working 2, 3, 4 jobs at a time. So I was kind of a latchkey kid, both me and my sister, which means that, we'd come home after school to an empty house. Although we had family. So a lot of my family had immigrated from Portugal to that neighborhood. So I had both sets of grandparents, I had cousins. So it was not a lonely childhood by any means in that regard. So, but yeah, I was outside a lot and I grew up basically, we didn't have camps growing up. My parents couldn't afford, or they could, but they chose, they didn't know camps were a thing. Yeah. So we participated in Toronto Parks and Rec. Like we would play marbles and tetherball. And so I was quite active as a child for sure. I enjoyed physical activity. And I enjoyed already at a young age learning something and challenging myself to get good at it.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like there was a lot of family around for you. And I'm curious to know if, and maybe it wasn't family, but was there someone that was pivotal to you as a young girl? And if so, I'm curious to know how.
Yeah, there was. So when I was about 12, we had a cousin of mine come and stay with us. And this is when we had already moved to Mississauga. So we had a bigger home and space to host him because he was living with us while he was going to college for police college. His name is Al Almeida. That's my cousin's name, Al. And so I was about 12 at the time, and he was in his late teens, early 20s, and he would go to the gym, to Gold's Gym in Mississauga, which if you know Gold's Gym in Mississauga at the time off Dixie Road, it was like the hardcore old school iron lifting and grunting, the whole bit. And he would take me, I would tag along. And that was my introduction to the gym, that atmosphere. And I thank him to this day for introducing me into that world, which is something that I wouldn't have been exposed to otherwise.
Wow, that's really cool. So were you lifting weights at that time or were you kind of just watching?
I wasn't lifting weights at that time, but the memory stuck with me. And, the feeling stuck with me of being in that place. I was very fascinated by what everybody was doing in there. I was also very aware of how I was responding to the environment because it piqued my interest. I wasn't intimidated, and it's probably because I was with my cousin and he made sure that I would be hanging out on the bench and watching him do a set. And so I feel like I had a positive introduction into that world, and it stuck with me. So I didn't start lifting weights until fast forward, I was 17, but at least I already had the awareness that this place existed And I knew where to go when I needed it, when I wanted it.
Yeah, well, I find it so interesting when people are introduced to these different types of sports or activities at a young age, because it kind of sits differently. It kind of like works its way in and kind of stays there. And with, all of the sport that you're involved with, was it always boxing for you? Like, when did the boxing start? Let's understand that journey a little bit.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I was a huge sports fanatic growing up. Even on my website, I explained the story about, I used to love the show called Beyond the Glory, which was a story about athletes' biographies and how they overcame these trials and tribulations and the victory story. And I just loved those stories. I felt really inspired by them at a young age. And it really jacked me up. Like, it really gave me this boost of anything is possible and you can go out and get whatever you want. So I loved baseball. I was obsessed with the Toronto Blue Jays and I collected their cards and the whole bit. I would go to the games and I would play baseball as well. Throughout high school, elementary school and high school, I played whatever was available. So it was basketball, volleyball, and soccer.
Wow.
So at the time, boxing was not on my radar. In fact, I kind of thought, oh my goodness, what a dumb sport. Like, two people beating the crap out of each other. I couldn't even watch it. I was like, I didn't land on it. Like, if I saw it on TV, I would pass it, right? I would rather watch the basketball or baseball until I tried it. And this is, 25 years later, this is something that I can share with people. And I always say, don't knock it until you try it.
Yeah.
Because that's when you actually can understand, because it's a very hard to understand concept, which is what seems like two people beating each other up. But when you really dig deep and dissect what's actually happening, which is the sport aspect of it, it's quite involved and quite intelligent, actually.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it intimidates me a little bit. I've never tried it myself, but these athletes, they're just in unbelievable shape. And I guess strategy is a huge part of boxing. What qualities, like the best boxers, or maybe some of the best boxers that you've dealt with, are there some commonalities with like the qualities that make them good at what they do?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, some of these qualities you might already possess once you get into boxing. And, boxing found me because I used it. I was working at a gym at the time and I was focusing on my bodybuilding. I actually competed in a bodybuilding competition in my early 20s. And the gym where I was training, they had a very sophisticated boxing program in the basement. And that's how I kind of walked into it. And I started taking boxing classes just for cross training to get in really good shape for my bodybuilding.
Nice.
And that's when and where I thought, ooh, this feels different. I kind of like the aspects and the qualities that you're asking me about. What really stood out for me was the level of focus and the absolute need